Hi, this is going to be a double feature. I am going to be reviewing the Nightfell Artbook and the Nightfell original soundtrack. What is Nightfell? This is a new, dark fantasy setting for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Although this setting is so good that I would recommend that you consider converting it to other D20 based systems if you do not play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You will need to do some converting and tweaking, of course, but the lore and the background of this setting is so good that I would even recommend that you consider converting it to other non-D20 based systems. This review, or a couple of reviews, are going to serve as teasers for the main review that is going to feature the core rulebook and many other add-ons, optional add-ons that could enhance the experience. So let's get started. First, I am going to talk about the art book, and then I am going to give you my thoughts on each of the different tracks featured in the OST. So when it comes to the art book, it is incredibly beautiful to look at. It is truly a collector's item. The book doesn't have bookmarks, but you won't be needing them, even though it's 192 pages long of illustrations, packed with clean looking illustrations, no text related to background or the rules of the game. I think it's going to be a pleasure for you to scroll up and down the illustrations. Perhaps the addition of bookmarks that lead you to specific illustrations would be nice, but in this case I wouldn't consider them that necessary. At the start of this art book, you have some words by the author of the setting. He talks about the challenges of creating this setting, and as I hinted earlier, I am going to save the juicy details for the review of the core book. But here I can tell you that this setting is quite bleak, but there are some embers of hope. Imagine a world where the sun has died, and only a few sparks, a few lights remain. They depend completely on the existence of powerful entities that are being threatened by equally powerful beings from another plane of existence. When it comes to Nightfell, there is a good balance of action, investigation, and horror, and there is an emphasis on communicating environments, colors, emotions. So you will get a good grasp of this setting by taking a look at the illustrations. I am going to be showing you throughout this review some snippets of the wonderful, amazing art. These artists are quite obviously masters of their craft. Just take a look at these images, so evocative, so immersive. So when it comes to my opinion concerning the art book, I would recommend getting it not only as a collector's item, but also as a source of inspiration, because you have all of the illustrations in a single place, completely clear of any other text for those that are quite sensible when it comes to their perception of the environment, of the flavor of the setting. You are going to appreciate the essence of Nightfell by moving through the pages and becoming inspired by these images. For game masters, it's going to be very easy for you to come up with scenarios, adventures, and campaigns. Just taking a look at some of these screenshots of the game world, you're going to be thinking about plot lines, the ways in which you can use non-player characters, the challenges and problems that the player characters can face as they are trying to keep the flame of hope alive in a world of almost complete darkness. And when it comes to the players, they are going to feel inspired to come up with amazing backgrounds for their player characters. Those enemies, those places that have marked your character are going to be quite obvious as you take a look at all of the different structures, the peoples within the setting, the flora and fauna, the twisted versions herein, because after the sun has died, things will never be the same in this world. Perhaps there is a chance to change things, but that is up to the player characters. This world will end in damnation unless the player characters do something about it. Now I am going to talk about the original soundtrack. Let's take a look at each of the tracks separately. Track 1, The Last Sun. Have you ever stopped to consider what would happen to this world if the sun simply just died? In Nightfell, the sun is a living entity, or rather was a living entity. It was one of the primes, one of the first beings in existence in the whole reality, in the scheme of totality. The sun was the source of all life and joy, but now it has been assassinated by the dark. Only a few embers remain, keeping some hope alive, but most importantly, the possibility of there being life in this bleak setting. If the player characters don't act, those small embers that are kept alive by the primes will disappear completely. Track 2. Lagoran. There are many tales of heroes that have a tragic end. Sometimes they die in battle, but in the case of Lagoran, imagine being someone so virtuous, so magnanimous, so magnificent in every action, gifted with superior intellect and understanding of things, effectively working both as a just warlord and a sage of all things in reality, a true jack of all trades and master of all. But then you dwell too deeply into mysteries that perhaps were better left unexplored, especially when the guidance provided in order to understand those mysteries comes from some disembodied voice that perhaps is not entirely trustworthy. I can tell you right now that Lagoran is one of the best antagonists in a fantasy setting up to date, at least according to my opinion, after many years of looking through different settings, because only a few antagonists manage to threaten the entire reality of a setting, not just a region, not just a planet. This could have cosmic consequences. I can't wait to tell you about his story in the core book review. Track 3. Endless Night. Now that the sun is gone, the player characters will have to face challenges beyond anything that they have experienced before. Everything related to survival, the planting of crops, the tending of animals, absolutely every aspect of their way of life has been changed by the impending darkness that threatens to overtake all of reality, all of the material plane, and beyond that. In the setting, there are 3 planes of existence, and one plane, a darker plane, has decided to take over the other 2. There are undead aberrations everywhere. There is not a single place that is not consumed by pervasive penumbra. It is up to the player characters to adventure into this endless night and unravel the mysteries and perhaps defeat this darkness once and for all. But, to be honest, it is unlikely. Perhaps at most, they will be able to fend off the nights, the shadows, just for a moment. You could still have hope that there could be some solution, but the situation is looking quite grim. Track 4. Dark Echoes. This is a world of dark sorcery and powers. Even the player characters have been tainted by this dark. You will find very unusual species and races within this setting. Some of them are quite monstrous. Take a look at different horror films. Do you see those characters, those monsters? Some of the player characters are just as monstrous as them, but despite their nature, they all have their reasons to fight against this encroaching threat that is taking over everything. Even if the player characters have different objectives and agendas, one thing is certain: the antagonistic force that is threatening not only the world of Yurmen, but also the cosmos itself, is not including them in its own plans. Track 5. The World Below. Within the 3 main planes of existence in the setting of Nightfell, there is a dark mirror, a reflection of the primes. The primes are beings of a sidereal nature. They are light taking shape into deity-like forms. But this darker plane, a plane that reflects everything in a twisted way, a plane that takes life and corrupts it into undeath, only wants, only craves to consume all. Like an amoeba, like a parasite, it only cares about satisfying this insatiable need, this monstrous hunger of consuming all of existence, of plunging it into complete darkness. Track 6, Witches from the East. In this setting, the witches are quite evil for the most part. They kidnap children and sacrifice them for unholy power, and sometimes their victims are inducted into their cults, and they are indoctrinated in the most grotesque ways possible. Some of these victims escape. They either manage to kill the witches, or they just run away. And later on, when they are older, when they are stronger, they could take up arms or spells to fight against these witches and many other threats within the setting of Nightfell. This is actually a background for the player characters. If you take this background for your character, you can be certain that character went through hell while growing up in the midst of these vile witches. Track 7, Forgotten Alleys. There are many places you should not go into, even within the bastions of civilization. The agents of the enemy are always near, always lurking, moving about, taking their chances to kill, maim, and devour. The player characters must always be armed, not only with weapons, but with a source of light. You will feel as if you have never managed to exit the dungeon, any treacherous site in which you go into, because the entire planet, the entire world of Urmen is blanketed, or rather smothered in darkness. Even the most well-lit or well-illuminated places hide all sorts of threats and horrors. Track 8, Exorcism. There is not a single being in the world of Nightfell, in the world of Urmen, that is not under the threat of constant possession. This darkness taints everything. This includes the architecture, the environments, the plants, the animals, and the thoughts and actions of the people. Life in Urmen, or what remains of it, is a constant struggle, keeping the darkness at bay, keeping the undead horrors and monstrosities at a distance until you find the means to vanquish them forever, to send them into oblivion. One can only hope. Track 9, Deadly Winter. And with the absence of light and heat comes the deadly embrace of winter. The weather itself has never been kind since the death of the sun. It constantly claws and bites at the characters' skin, at their throats. If they are not killed by the monsters and spirits that inhabit the world of Urmen, they will be taken by the cold of the night. It is not just the paradox of numbing pain that threatens the player characters, it is also a chill of the soul. Track 10, Remains of the Ancients. Perhaps by going through the different accomplishments of those that were before them, the player characters can find some respite, some hidden truth to help them survive in the current state of Urmen. Hidden within the structures, the books, the objects, the relics of the past, there could be some answer, some key, some abandoned clue to battle against the absence of all light. In the setting of Nightfell, there are going to be endless adventures as the player characters explore forsaken and forbidden places that get darker in every sense the deeper they go into them. Track 11, Mirithlet. Perhaps the greatest accomplishment of Lagoran. What better way to leave some heroic trace behind than through your own child? Lagoran may have failed. Lagoran may have doomed us all, but Mirithlen remains as a small source of hope. Her teachings are not forgotten, and despite her entering a transition or transformation rather, that takes her beyond the mortal plane, her presence still remains, guiding those in search of answers, providing a spiritual bulwark against her father's profane actions. Track 12. What lurks in darkness? Perhaps the true darkness lies not in the dark corners of Yurmen. The true darkness lies in the hearts of its inhabitants. There are many who have turned to the side of the dark plane and are ready to betray their friends, their families, their entire people, just because they were not strong enough to resist the constant pull. You can never be too certain as to the intentions of those that inhabit the world of Yurmen. A lot of them are quite eager to become undead, or to add others to the ranks of the tenebrous forces. Track 13. Battle Under the Moonlight. In the setting of Nightfell, the player characters, despite all of that darkness, despite the bleakness and the loss of hope, can become superheroic. They have the means to do so through weapons or magic, and through their own bodies as well. All of them have been affected by this loss of light in the world. Some of them could even look quite monstrous to those that lived in Yurmen before the sun died. It is through the understanding of their own shadow selves that they can wield a twilight power against the enemies of the world of Yurmen. Track 14. The Last One Standing. There are powerful non-player characters in Nightfell, especially Lagoran, so the player characters have a titanic task before them. They must grow stronger, they must match their enemies and the threat overall. They must come together and fight, not only for the fate of a single individual, but for the fate of the world of Yurmen and for the entire universe itself, because if Yurmen falls, this darkness will corrupt everything in existence. This is a fight where the last one standing is the world of Yurmen. It must be so, against all odds. Track 15. Death to the Primes. The main objective of those that wish to consume all is the extermination of the surviving Primes. Many consider that the assassination of the sun has sent the Primes into a downward spiral of complete annihilation. And godly as they may be, they need the help of the player characters. They need heroes to rise, or anti-heroes even. The very fate of the equilibrium between light and darkness will be decided through the adventures and campaigns of the player characters. All weapons, artifacts, spells, and supernatural abilities of the would-be group of heroes must be channeled to pierce through this never-ending night. And this concludes this review. Let me give you my final thoughts. You already know what I think of the art book. The art book is worth it as a collector's item and as a source of inspiration for both game masters and players. And in this review, I only showed you a few of the images. There are plenty more illustrations within the art book. I also forgot to mention that each illustration contains a title or a description, so that way you won't be confused as to what character or place it is representing in the setting. Now, when it comes to the soundtrack, it is so exquisite. This music is really good, not only for Nightfell, but for many other dark fantasy games. You can see a nice balance of tracks that are focused more on mystery and moodiness, but some others are focused more on action, because the setting of Nightfell, despite having ample opportunities for investigation and unraveling the mysteries of the world itself, will have spectacular battles between the forces of darkness, the undead, and many aberrations against those that wish to survive, that stand together to protect that which seems inevitably destined to fall into damnation. So I highly recommend that you get the Nightfell Artbook and the soundtrack. In this review, I just showed you a few pieces of the artwork and some clips of the tracks. You will see many others in my complete review of the core rulebook and the add-ons as well. Thank you for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.